Thanksgiving planning always sneaks up on us. Every year I say I'm going to get ahead of it, and then I don't. Potlucks, the big family feast. But this year I'm keeping things easy and stress-free with Whole Foods Market. It's my one-stop shop for everything I need all month long. From quality organic produce to great prices on turkey and amazing deals on baking essentials. Plus, their 365 brand always keeps my pantry stocked with the basics without breaking the budget. And for the days when life gets too busy, their grab-and-go sides are a lifesaver. The creamy mashed russet potatoes and sea salt and cracked pepper green beans are perfect for potlucks, quick dinners, or last-minute Friendsgiving plans. Nobody needs to know I didn't actually cook it myself, right? I love browsing their produce sales for fresh ingredients to make casseroles and classic sides that taste like home. And if you want to skip the cooking altogether, Whole Foods Market Catering has you covered. From turkey to dessert, all made with the same better ingredients and high standards that you'd expect. Make sure to order by November 25th to reserve your bird, your sides, and your sweets. This Thanksgiving, save more, stress less, and make it delicious. All with Whole Foods Market. Shop everything you need for Thanksgiving now at Whole Foods Market. Oh, and happy Thanksgiving.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Nippy Ames, and this is A Little Bit Culty.
We woke up from a cult, and that journey was captured in The Vow on HBO and in my memoir, Scarred.
Now, in this podcast, we break down the shame and secrets that make these experiences so destructive with honest conversations on how seemingly benign groups can cross into the cultiverse and how to spot and recover from trouble if it happens to you.
Each week, we bring in experts, survivors, and whistleblowers to explore red flags, resilience, and even share a few laughs, because sometimes you gotta laugh.
Subscribe to our Patreon for early and ad-free listening, some live Q&A, and exclusive content at patreon.com/alittleBitCulty.
Welcome to Season 8 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back to A Little Bit Culty, everybody. We are super excited about this one. Why is that, Sarah?
Because today's guest is awesome. Danny Rensch is international chess master, broadcaster, chief chess officer, and co-founder at chess.com, whose story goes far beyond the board.
Before co-founding the world's largest chess platform, Danny survived a childhood in the Church of Immortal Consciousness, a controlling Arizona-based cult where his chess talent was heralded as a divine mission, but also became a double-edged sword for isolation and pressure.
In his acclaimed memoir, which we absolutely loved, Dark Squares, Danny reveals how chess first offered him escape and purpose, but also led to a traumatic and coerced separation from his mother and intense emotional struggles.
We talked about the manipulative tactics and red flags that signaled cult control, the complex relationship between specialness and entrapment, and how chess ultimately became his liberation and his path to healing. Whether you're into chess or stories of resilience, we hope Danny's journey will inspire and offer hope to anyone seeking freedom from high-control environments.
Danny's story is truly mind-blowing. This two-parter does not do his book justice, and we cannot recommend it enough.
Yeah, we bounce around the timeline, kind of like a Tarantino film, but we have the feeling you'll love him as much as we do. His story is amazing. So here's our conversation with Danny Rensch,
the youngest chess master in Arizona history.
12 years old.
Enjoy. Danny, welcome to A Little Bit Culty.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited about this podcast. I think partly because your story is obviously so epic, but also because it was really nice to learn about something other than cults.
Chess.
To learn about chess.
A little bit chessy.
Yes, a little bit chessy.
The book is a little bit chessy.
Our 7-year-old likes chess.
I told him. He's sending us a package.
Oh, yeah, he loves it.
I need to get the t-shirt size. I got to text you for the t-shirt size. Make sure we extra special chess package.
Incredible. And we're sending you one as well. Our kids don't get super excited about our podcast because, why would they? But when we told them that we were interviewing one of the co-founders from chess.com, they were so excited. And we were excited. Honestly, this is such an incredible book. Your story is so, what's the word?
There was no off switch going through it. It was like straight.
Devoured.
Yeah, it was great. Fun listen.
And I'm sorry that you went through all that.
I appreciate both the compliments of the book. And yeah, well, it's interesting. One of the goals I had in trying to piece together what was objectively, even though I knew I was talking about my life, I knew it was a crazy story, but we wanted to also do a little bit of justice where we could by the chess world and sort of explain some of the historical things that happened in order for the online chess scene to be what it is today. So the fact that you say it was a page turner and we managed to accomplish that makes me very happy because that was my goal. I told my editor when I started writing it that I wanted it to be like a Tarantino movie. I wanted it to have people on the edge of their seat in the best way we could so that people would keep reading. And so that makes me happy, despite obviously the other traumatic events of my life, which are, of course, the main focus of the story.
Yes. And you do leave us on the edge of the seat at the end of each chapter with lines like, and that was the worst decision of my life. What happens next? You have to keep reading. And just so that our listeners stay to the end of this episode, at the end, I'm going to tell you about our mutual friend in the chess space, which I'm going to blow your mind. We're going to leave that for a little Easter egg.
Yeah.
Okay. I have no idea who this person is, but you told me that when we were getting ready for the show.
You know him well. The cults overlap.
The cults overlap. You mentioned this person in your book. Don't say it yet. Don't say it yet.
I know how this works. I know how cliffhangers work.
So obviously we have so much to cover, and yet we want to leave some of the, the meat of it for people to read the book. But let's talk a little bit first about the group that you grew up in. And we thought we knew about pretty much all the cults that ever existed after 250 episodes, but we had not heard of
We're in Arizona
yours.
Again.
Back in Arizona.
Back in Arizona.
Tell us about the Church of Immortal Consciousness.
Yeah, so the Church of Immortal Consciousness was a group. It no longer exists, and for reasons we'll obviously get into. But it was founded by Trina and Stephen Camp. Trina Camp herself was a trance medium, which is a person who claims to be able to channel messages from spirits. In her particular case, trance mediumship versus traditional psychic behavior or channeling is more of a process where she would completely leave her body and the entity of Dr. Duran, who was the spirit that many people, I think, joined the collective for, would speak through. Before we get into even the validity of trance, and obviously people have different experiences wherever they sit on the metaphysical journey, regardless of cults, I think that it actually is an interesting conversation to separate whether you believe in any type of life after death and high demand, high control cult groups. I think there are two different discussions, but many people joined the group because of Dr. Duran. And Trina and Stephen, for a long time, as the story was told to me, were traveling, trancing for people on the road. And at some point, they decided to settle down in Mesa, Arizona, and tell people that if they wanted to hear Dr. Duran, they needed to come to them. And that's where my parents joined very early on, two of the earliest members of the collective, which is what I grew up calling it, along with anyone else. It was referred to as the collective. Sometimes we would call it like the family, our family. Sometimes we would call it the collective. The community could also be used. But yeah, fundamentally, the church was centered around Dr. Duran and the idea that his teachings were something that people wanted to adhere themselves to. And I've heard different debates from many different people of that generation at this point, especially with my book coming out, those who've reached out. And it's been actually surprisingly pretty much all positive. But there's been different debates of whether the founding was always intended to be a cult and sort of, potentially take advantage of what could be building a business around this process of trance, or whether it was sort of accidental. There are different people on different spectrums of that. But yeah, that's the quick version.
Yeah, that's a good summary. So Dr. Duran was the spirit that Trina was channeling. And for the record, I believe in the possibility. Nippy's less so.
I need a little bit more forensics. That's all. I need a little bit more physics, and I do believe in something. Yeah.
But if you want to just jump to that, I can tell you that I also have been someone who I've had a lot of my own journey in that regard with whatever else I've sort of educated myself on and or come to believe in the idea that consciousness can be fundamental, and that if I'm really debating the origins of our existence and we're talking about the space-time matter versus consciousness fundamental theory, I tend to lean consciousness as fundamental and that it has the potential to live outside the body. So I guess if I say that, I am open to the idea that trance could be real, even though I hold very strongly, in the other hand, that I was raised in a cult, right? And so that's become a very interesting thing to sort of come to terms with, that this idea of spirit and some of my experiences felt very empowering and good. And at the same time, there's no denying the level of abuse and manipulation and the way that the messages from spirit were used in non-spiritual ways, I guess you could say.
Because there is no forensics, right? So like you can kind of make up your own.
Well, the forensics is your experience.
Yeah. Well, and
I
you
guess.
I'm saying you can make that up, but and I'm kind of where you are in that is I have an experience of it. I believe there's something there. I don't have an apparatus to measure it in a definitive way, but I do have a little bit of faith that there's something there and open to more, and I'm taking baby steps.
When I hear you say that, Danny, it makes me feel like you've clearly, and we're going to get to this more in the latter half about your healing, that you're not thinking in black and white terms anymore. You can have both things exist at the same time. And I think sometimes when people first get out of a cult, they throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, that's just all a scam and it's nothing, none of that's true. And they become like stark atheists, for example. So
Yeah, they swing the other way.
Yeah, which we see a lot. So anyway, it's interesting. And there's been a lot of even more successful cults, like Ramtha cult channeled, what's her face?
Jay-Z.
Jay-Z Knight channeled Ramtha, Claire Prophet channeled El Moria, like big, huge churches channel people. Like this is not unusual in groups like this. So, no judgment from us.
Well, it's fascinating, I think, as a discussion, and we can move on. Obviously, your podcast, you'll guide it, but I will just quickly touch on the fact that it's an odd discussion to have when you have mainstream denominations who essentially make claims that are, if anything, more extreme at times, whether it's the finding of golden tablets and a direct connection to God, or whether it's the idea that a prophet like Jesus could walk on water. And in many ways, there are experiences that were then translated into words or they became urban, whatever other type of myth and legend. And we believe in the potential of these things. And I think there's a part of the human experience where I think it's two things. Like there are the storytelling that people maybe want to, worship for maybe not good reasons that give away their own agency and their own power in ways that they shouldn't. And then there are reasons to believe that we can all become the best versions of ourselves. We all want to believe we can become the highest, being that we're capable of being. And so you look at these alchemists, essentially, these people who perform magic to some degree, and you want to believe that you can do the same for your life. And just to your point, Sarah, I think for me, the journey has been a wild one. It's been full of all types of heartache and anger and rage at times. And I would say there was a short stint where I was probably hitting the guardrails on the side of atheism or at least agnosticism to the degree of what I was raised under. But as I've come to the other side of making the best attempt to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, you sort of find yourself living more comfortably in the opposing truth conversation that I could have and still have been the victim of spiritual messages that were weaponized and used to hurt people, right? And those things can actually exist at the same time. And I think that as a lot of people explore their own skepticism in their faith, they can actually be afraid to embrace these conversations. You're worried that if you start to pull a little bit at that skepticism, that the whole thing will come undone. Whereas I would argue, if you're actually avoiding that, it's a problem. And that probably the best thing to do, the only way to really have a strong relationship with your own version of faith, whatever that is for you, in my opinion, is to fully explore all the cracks and the things that you have a problem with, and then still see if there's something for you on the other side that makes your life better, not in a way as a blind cult member, right? And so that has been my experience, and it's been a journey in that.
That is a great soundbite. I'm picturing it on our Instagram feed right now. But I was thinking as you were talking, that's such a great point you're in Utah, right? You're in the
Ground zero.
If
the
anyone
epicenter.
gives you shit about your cult, you could say, wait a second, did you know that Joseph Smith had a dream about an angel? And you know what I mean? Like, what's the difference, to your point?
Yeah.
How are we deciding what's normal, what's not? We always ask our guests, why'd you sign up for this? Why'd you join? You were born into this group. Let's talk a little bit about your parents and where they were at and what in the era that they were living in, and how did they end up in this community?
Yeah. It's, again, something I can only speak to from both the stories I was told as well as what I now know about the era and understand, kind of more broadly, where it's safe to kind of make some generalities, right? I think this was a time, for my parents, they were coming out of the 60s and the 70s. My mom was a full-blown hippie. She would say so herself. She was searching for what hopefully would be her spiritual home. She had already bounced around. She had actually converted to Judaism for her first husband. She was actively practicing transcendental meditation, which for those who don't know it is like a very It's a lot of breath work, and it's a very intense form of meditation where the goal is to like literally levitate outside of your body, or at least have the feeling that you are separating your consciousness from the ego, and in a way that is kind of an intense process, regardless of, again, whether you believe in that or not. Anyone who's done a lot of breath work and intense meditation, those things can be really intense. So my mom was a certified transcendental meditation teacher. My dad, on the other side, came from a life where he was sort of looking from the other extreme. So to touch on, my mom lost both of her parents young, both in sort of tragic ways, and had found herself on these spiritual paths, I think more as an open searcher. My dad had a very stable life, one of more material comfort. He was born into a wealthy family in California, had gone to law school and was a practicing attorney, but also found his life to be pretty empty. He had actually converted to Buddhism and was regularly practicing Buddhism when he met my mom. So my mom and dad have now met. My dad, a Buddhist, my mom, transcendental meditation person. I don't know, no longer practicing Judaism, but liked a lot of things about the Jewish faith. And together, they eventually went to a trance circle where Stephen and Trina were there together. At this point, I'm pretty sure they were already together. It's funny, I actually don't know all the details of whether my mom and dad met Trina before Stephen and Trina were together. There's a possibility they did. I'd have to dive harder into that. But yeah, they both heard Duran, and my mom and dad, in their own stories of whatever bits and pieces I've gotten, both fell in love with Dr. Duran's messages and his teaching. And for them, Duran was always a separate entity from Trina. And they had that experience early on, and they would both sort of double down on that. That their idea was they wanted to hear Dr. Duran more. It wasn't necessarily about Stephen and Trina. In fact, the irony of my dad's relationship with Stephen Camp, as they would become really the number one and number two people that really made the collective, for all of its bad ways, work, is everyone would tell you that my dad and Stephen Camp didn't like each other at all and never did at first. And part of it, I think, kind of came because of their inherited, they were both sort of like, they kind of considered themselves, they're both spiritual gurus on their own. I think my dad had like his own kind of ego about who he was, and Stephen Camp obviously, had goals for himself in terms of being a spiritual leader. And so that's kind of its own interesting part of it. But yeah, they both ended up moving to the collective very early on in Mesa, Arizona, and joining up fully, which meant completely financially merged. It was full-blown communism. Everybody turned over their money. Even if you had a job that made more money in the world, everything was merged internally. And they were full adherents to the communal lifestyle. And I think the idea for them was that this would help their relationship. But in many ways, it was very clear that it did not.
How do they convince people to do that?
It's interesting. I think at the time, it was a little more common in that these groups expected that. I've talked to a number of older folks who, again, sit on different ends of the spectrum of it. But I think the expectation that if you were going to live a spiritual lifestyle following Dr. Duran's teaching, which inherently was that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, not physical beings trying to remember they have a soul. The idea was that you were trying to overcome the material plane and sort of those needs, right? And so I think on the one hand, it was written in stone, for lack of a better metaphor, into kind of what you were there to accomplish. And then I also would say that logistically, from what I've educated myself some about these groups, I think that it was more commonplace that everyone was just kind of merged at the time. That was a thing that I think a lot of these groups kind of expected.
This is the 70s.
Yeah, it's the 70s.
Correct? Yeah. And also,
there was an attempt, in our cult, they tried that.
A little bit, but I lived on a kibbutz for a year, and the kibbutzim have the same thing where it's more socialist, I'd say, than communist, because there is a taking, I think you even said this in their book, each according to their, what is the phrase?
Needs.
Yeah, but the needs weren't being taken care of. That's why it's communist, not socialist.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. I think certainly as that founding group of people eventually started having children, and the expectations on the for the household to have enough became more than just a bunch of free-loving hippies who didn't have children, right? Just to be honest, and I'm kind of joking at that. I'm not even trying to disparage the idea that they were coming together with an ideal, or at least they would like to say that. It's a little different when you're coming together as single people who don't have children yet. Whether you're married or not, you're sort of operating in a different level of agency when you don't have your own biological children, right? I think that for the founding group of people to then start having kids who were born into the collective, how they managed money and how each household was given what they needed to survive. I mean, literally to have enough food for us to eat. I think that's where a lot of, social dynamics and politics as well, and some being more equal than others, as I've said, right? The famous Orwell quote, right? In terms of what actually happens in communism practice, everyone's equal. There are those who are more equal than others, right? I think a lot of that stuff really started to play out when my generation and the kids who were born into the collective started coming.
Let's take a break from the cultiverse, shall we? Here's a word from our sponsors.
Between crowded airports, darker days with daylight savings, and end-of-year stress, it's easy to fall behind on important things like staying healthy. That's why I stay one scoop ahead with AG1, the daily foundational nutrition drink that helps my body keep up when life gets hectic. When Nippy and I first opened our first package from AG1, we literally fought over the little bottle, the shaker bottle, and I immediately took our D3 and K2 drops. AG1 is loaded with antioxidants, probiotics, and functional mushrooms to support immune resilience. And I love the packets for when we're traveling over the holidays. Superfoods and B vitamins help me sustain my energy levels without feeling the crash, while over 70 high-quality ingredients fill those nutrition gaps in one fell scoop. When stress hits hard, AG1's prebiotics, probiotics, and enzymes support a balanced gut, which means better regularity, stronger immunity, and a calmer mind. I love starting my day with AG1. It helps me feel refreshed, resilient, and ready to take on whatever is next. As the year winds down, don't fall behind. Stay one scoop ahead with AG1. Head to ag1.com/culty to get a free welcome kit with an AG1 flavor sampler and a bottle of vitamin D3 plus K2 when you first subscribe. That's drinkag1.com/culty. Enjoy!
We love electrolytes in the Ames household. When I'm hydrated, everything just works better. My energy, mood, focus, everything improves. That's why I'm excited to try Drip Drop, our newest sponsor. It's not just about thirst, it's about keeping my body and brain running at full power. If you're feeling foggy, tired, or just vaguely dehydrated from life, meet Drip Drop. It's doctor-developed, fast hydration that actually works. It's got the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose for rapid absorption, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading sports drinks. Translation: more focus, better energy, improved mood, even that I actually slept last night glow. It's trusted by firefighters, medical pros, and top athletes, and it tastes amazing. 16 original flavors, 8 sugar, all crave-worthy. I can't wait to use it every day, morning, post-workout, or when parenting feels like a cardio class, which it does. Plus, with flexible subscriptions, you're never caught without it. Wherever you are, gym, workplace, or household chaos, just stay dripped, not dried. Right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 25% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code CULTY. That's dripdrop.com, promo code CULTY for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. Dripdrop.com and use promo code CULTY now. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. As the days get shorter and everything starts feeling a little dimmer, it's a good time to check in on your people. Maybe it's calling your grandma. Maybe it's texting the friend you've been meaning to grab lunch with since last spring. Little things like that remind us we're not alone. And honestly, that connection goes both ways. Just like it can take courage to send that message, reaching out for therapy can feel the same way, but it's worth it. Most people who start therapy say the same thing afterward. Why didn't I do this sooner? BetterHelp makes it easy to take that first step. Their licensed therapists work under a strict code of conduct and are matched to you through a short questionnaire, so you're not scrolling through endless profiles trying to guess who's right for you. And if your first match isn't quite right, you can switch anytime. So as the season changes, stay connected to your people and to yourself with BetterHelp. This month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you're checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it easier to take that first step. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/culty. Escape's over. Let's return to our regularly scheduled cult talk.
Also, I think it's important to point out, you didn't say this and you may not agree, but TM has lots of great value to meditation and all that stuff, but the organization itself has definitely been called a cult, and we've covered that. And it's interesting to see how Buddhism and TM and Judaism and all these components, but we have not mentioned the fact that Stephen Kemp was trained with Werner Erhard in EST.
That's right. That's right. I think my father was as well. That kind of explains even more of their sort of dynamic of sort of power wrestling with each
Top
other
dog.
very early on, which is, again, very ironic because I think I've explained the dynamics before and happy to again. I think their partnership was actually key for the collective to work in terms of the roles that they each played. But yeah, so they were both EST certified, right? Whatever that is. I think the EST, obviously later, the EST group later rebranded to the Landmark Forum, and there's all kinds of discussion about that group. And in terms of, again, we could talk the baby in the bathwater. We can talk about the cultish aspects of all of that stuff. But what I would say is, regardless, there was a very heavy influence of EST training and EST terminology and EST practices within the collective, sort of stacked on top of, or you could say below, Duran's message. And it's funny because I think in our cult, in our group, there is this idea, believe it or not, that the messages coming from Duran can be good. What I mean by that is, believe in trance or not, there's the idea that your experience can decide on a daily basis whether that sermon is helpful for you or not. Right? Then there's the human beings who are providing the guidelines and the framework for the everyday practices, which included things like the group process, which I can say for everyone listening, I've learned this is very similar to what a lot of cults have had, whether it was the game, that was something people have known. And as I educated myself, where I was like, oh, wow, this whole thing that we did wasn't as special as I thought. It was actually something that a lot of other groups practice, that you would have this sort of group,
feedback.
Clearing, right? Group meetings, but ultimately they were mostly not good, and really did a lot of damage. And in many ways, I think were very effective in the group sort of policing and controlling each other. And so there was Duran's teachings. There was a lot of infrastructure laid out by the EST terminology. Then there was practices like the process, which is a group meeting where everyone comes together and kind of expresses their judgments on each other. And I grew up, with all of that stuff being second nature, both regular process as even as kids, and then as we grew, and then also knowing how to speak the language of, which was a combination of Duran's teaching as well as kind of, I guess, EST sort of
the
ways
integrity.
that we talked, integrity and purpose and all these things. So rambling a little bit, apologize if I am, but yeah.
No, this is great.
Fine.
This is what we want to know.
Hopefully that's a quick framework that I think to your audience, especially since, we're talking to kind of an educated cult audience, right, would quickly explain some of the basics. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing you're leaving out with the EST and that stuff, it's a normalized culture of abuse. Doesn't necessarily
Under the guise of growth.
Right.
Like I'm gonna help you grow because, there's no growth and comfort, and it's gonna be painful. It's sort of one of the underlying tenets of EST.
Yep.
Confrontational.
It's so hard because that's where a lot of these groups can be very effective, because I've now been on enough podcasts, and obviously you read my book, that I needed to do this for myself as well. A big part of writing this book was frankly me maybe going through even more stages of separating for myself what the baby in the bathwater was. I will be honest that when I started writing this book 4 years ago, I thought I had a very clear list of things I thought that were good, things I thought that were bad. I would say by the end of that, I don't know that was really true anymore. I think I moved a lot of things more clearly over to the bad bucket. Even if I still maintained a couple good, I actually think even that whole process, for lack of a better word, was its own process, writing the book and coming to terms for myself. And what I would say is, again, that's another message that is very hard, because these days it takes one self-help search on Google to find a quote that says something like, there is no growth and comfort, right? It's not a hard thing to find when you're looking to motivate people to be willing to work hard, take on challenges, be self-reflective, do the things, or don't expect the results. It would be something that, whether it's like a physical trainer or like a self-help person, you can find dozens and dozens of quotes and versions of this language, which in theory, are not untrue. If you want to expect, if you expect valuable things, you guys are married. You've read about my marriage. Making a marriage work is hard work, right? You have to do a lot of things in order to have things that are valuable in your life. So there is truth to the phrase, there is no growth and comfort. Then you have groups and, high demand, high control environments where every aspect of your life is potentially not just under scrutiny, but your spiritual worth is at stake if you are not practicing or adhering to the expectations of kind of the hierarchy. And so then this idea that you can be moved to a new house at any moment, right? You can potentially be taken away from your family at any moment if you're not growing appropriately with them, right? Those types of things, you start to see are very clear weaponization of the idea that we should all be looking to grow and maybe be willing to be a little uncomfortable from time to time. You get what I'm saying? This has been a very, I'm obviously doing it in real time.
And it's celebrated. Yeah, it's celebrated.
No, it's exactly it. so many of the tenets of your group and ours and every group we've ever looked at in and of itself and in isolation and under certain circumstances has to be good. People don't join abusive cults on purpose. They join something that appears good. So the goodness, the community, the collective. I mean, I've said this in many of our podcasts. If I was born in this era, I totally would have joined something like the collective. I love community. I love living in groups. I love sharing the workload. All that stuff is great. And
also when you're performing and you're getting the results too,
which we're going to get to,
that justifies
yes,
the mantra.
No, absolutely. So Dr. Duran is from the 15th century. Did I get that right?
Yeah. The claim was a 15th century doctor who practiced medicine and was a licensed doctor. That's the story.
And did Trina talk about Dr. Duran as like a separate person?
Yes. Yeah.
Where did Dr. Duran become enlightened? Like, who is Dr. Duran?
Dr. Duran's teacher was Moses, according to the story. And that Dr. Duran had been on the astral plane after having died in the 15th century for, I guess, 500 years or so. And that he had trained with many masters, and that, his main teacher, his main guru, as it was referred to, was Moses. And this story wasn't told often. It was something that we sort of knew. I think sometimes because growing up as a kid, we were taught a mixture of things. Like we read traditional Bible stories, and there was traditional Christian sort of terminology. We read stories that would be more considered, Eastern-based religions, like whether they were Hindu or Buddhism. Like we were aware of sort of many of the great masters who had been on the planet at some point, whether it was Buddha, Ganesha, Jesus, Moses, and there was a perspective from Dr. Duran, which is that everyone has their own path to God. Every religion has a little bit right, but mostly wrong, because religion, the moment it creeps into dogma, is where it loses its way. And I actually tend to believe that today. The moment you're putting people into black and white buckets and or measuring their status through censorship of whether they're doing enough good by God. I've now used the phrase a few times that, in my opinion, spirituality and religion at its core can be very effective in asking you big questions. Why are you here? How do you find meaning? What is your purpose? The moment religion pretends it has the answers is the moment every religion becomes a cult. And to me, I think you can put mainstream and small groups in this bucket, because whether you're creating a hierarchy totem pole of the collective to the leaders of Steve and Trina, or whether you have a mainstream denomination where all is absolved because you confess your sins to a few particular people who may not even have your life experience. I think that you can put yourself in a world where you are giving away your agency and not actually as close to God as you would like to think, right? You don't really have your own relationship. And again, that is my view of this, but I've experienced kind of a lot of the good and the bad of that stuff. And what I would say back to your question is that the collective, as far as a practice and as far as a spiritual teaching, had a lot of, in my opinion, good things before you saw how it was misused by the teachers, right? The teachings themselves, even as I've unpacked them today, obviously become a lot more educated. I've accidentally become someone who's a bit obsessed with religious philosophy, probably because of what I've been through. And I've read a lot about this stuff. And I think there was a truth that I appreciated that was about, hey, there is no death, there are no dead. There is only more life. That which has no beginning can have no end. You are really just here to learn lessons, and all of this dogma and all of this worldly stuff is either a lie, or you can call it an opportunity to grow, which is that if you are a spiritual being having a physical experience, then you should perceive everything as a lesson, something that you can use to grow. And again, I understand, like you do, all the dangers of every one of those words and how they've been misused, from whether we're talking Scientology or EST or my group, right? But the idea was hey, they're not even trying to put you in a lane of Jesus wasn't real, or Buddha wasn't real, or Ganesha, or it's all real based on people who needed to hear those lessons, because everyone has just sort of chosen their own path to become their highest self. And so that sounded really good from Duran. But then the moment trance was over, if anyone ever talked about, hey, for my highest self, I actually need to lead the collective, that was off the table. You were now immediately going to hell, or in our group, going to hell wasn't a term. It was that you would re-embody over this. If you were ever told, hey, you're going to re-embody over that, that's the Jehovah's Witness version of you're going to hell if you don't believe this, right? And so the moment you actually were trying to explore your highest self in a way that might have been outside of what was ordained or considered good by the leaders of the collective, there was a lot of threats around you would re-embody, I think there's a very similar sort of line of it's even more sinful for someone who knows the highest path to turn against it, right? So if you're turning against this, this community, if you're turning against this collective way, you have to answer for even more karma than someone who never ever heard Duran. This was like a common sort of threat that was laid out as well. But hopefully what I said there as far as explaining that fundamentally practiced the idea of reincarnation, it believed that we have had many lifetimes and that we will have many more, that the earth plane is literally here for you to experience lessons, and that the only lie Duran was here to address was that that consciousness can't live without the body and that there is death. And that was like his fundamental message before we can very easily start stacking on a lot of bad things that came with that.
This episode would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. Let's hear what they have to offer.
The world is full of tours. But you don't choose a Toyota truck to follow the beaten path. You choose it to find the places in between. The detours, where each adventure pulls you toward the next. And wrong turns turn out right. So why would you ever take a tour when you could take a detour? Toyota Trucks.
As a busy parent, it's been such a game changer to do our weekly food shopping with Hungry Root. Hungry Root plans all our meals for the week, shops for us, and delivers groceries that fit our health goals, dietary preferences, and budget. Let's be honest, this time of year, our brains are maxed out. Between the podcast, the new book, holidays, kids' football, and trying to remember everyone's preferences, meal planning just is not happening. That's where Hungry Roots saved the day and helped us eat well and reach our health goals. Take their quiz, and their Smart Cart tech builds out groceries and recipes that fit your taste, goals, and schedule. We're talking 15,000 chef-created recipes, many ready in under 15 minutes, and over 1,000 grocery items from trusted brands. Everything meets super high ingredient standards, no weird additives, no junk. Just real food that tastes amazing. My personal favorite is how Hungry Root knows us so well, like a great personal shopper. They sent us delicious grilled turkey tenderloin with pesto veggies and our favorite snack from Lesser Evil. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/culty and use code culty. That's hungryroot.com/culty. Code culty to get 40% off your first box and free item of your choice for life.
Is anyone else feeling like this year is flying by way too fast? Where did the time go? Anxiety is real and it can leave you feeling scattered and behind. Calm gives you permission to slow down, even when everything else is speeding up. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, and it's here to help you feel better. When the ups and downs start feeling more like a roller coaster with no seatbelt, Calm has your back. You can pop into a quick guided meditation to ease anxiety, refocus your brain, or just remember to breathe. Or if sleep's been a challenge, Calm's got sleep stories, meditation, and music that will send you into the deepest slumber. There are even grounding exercises for those who just want to run away and live in the woods. And expert-led talks to help with everything from grief and self-esteem to relationships, aka the hard stuff they don't teach you in school. The Calm app puts all of it right in your pocket, so relief is just a tap away. With over 2 million 5-star reviews, Calm is helping people stress less, sleep more, and actually enjoy being human again. Imagine all of that without joining a cult. Calm your mind, change your life. Calm has an exclusive offer just for listeners of our show. Get 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/culty. This is an amazing value. Go to calm.com/culty for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. Calm.com/culty. And tell Calm you heard about them from us. Did you skip over all the ads? We hope you didn't. Thank you to our sponsors and thank you for listening. Now, let's resume our culty convo.
So his message was bastardized.
I would say yes.
Yeah. What he's saying is reasonable.
It's reasonable if you believe in a metaphysical potential thing. And I would argue that as someone who's, again, educated himself a lot on this, and I've acknowledged already openly that I hit the wall, I think, of atheism, or at least being very agnostic for quite some time. If I told myself as I came around to the other side of reading a lot and going through my own pain and reflection that I would be much more likely to believe we are some sort of spiritual being trying to evolve and learn something than I would to believe a singular lifetime existence where you expect the kid in Orange County to come to the same experience of God as the kid being born in Blood Diamond, Africa as we speak. right? Here are we like a bunch of, first world people debating religious philosophy while as we talk, there's somebody in Africa whose family is maybe being murdered over a diamond, right? I mean, how do we justify our existence to some degree if we're talking about a single lifetime where everybody was expected to come to the same version of God? Like part of me I could never swallow that. I would.
Yeah.
So as I embraced not just what I had experienced, despite the pain of what I experienced, and tried on the different hats of what I believed could be possible, frankly, from like a scientific level. If I'm really honest about it, the way I arrived at my own spiritual beliefs again was that I stopped debating the why. I think a lot of religion is based on the why you're here, and they think they have the answers, which leads to control. And I more came around to believing in spirituality again because I couldn't deny the how. I couldn't deny the miracle of life. At some point, something came from nothing, even if this is the simulation experience, right? Consciousness exists. I think, therefore I am. And I couldn't deny the idea that at some point, something came from nothing, or that which has no beginning has no end. Maybe we don't understand time and space as it relates to what Duran would say. Mm-hmm. And so as I tried on the scientific hat, I kind of came back around to reconsidering whether there were some teachings that were good and maybe even true. I hate to use the capital T, but maybe there were some things that were being said that were true, regardless of all the evidence of how they were clearly misused and abused. And so that is how I came back around to my spiritual belief.
Well, we've jumped to the end.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your no. It's great. I love these conversations.
Sarah.
Where are you at now? Part 2. But there's so much obviously in between. Tell us a little bit before we get into the red flags and everything. Your book describes this like very free-spirited time, running barefoot, playing. Before things were bad, things were good. Tell us a little bit about what life was like growing up there.
So, we're back in time to the generation of founding members who are having babies, and I was one of them. And as a kid, I was super happy. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't question a lot about your existence, right? And the fact that we lived in a small remote village, Tono Village, Arizona, and generally safe, except as I shared for the summer of 1995, where there was a lot of things happening to the cult, which ironically probably was one of the things that pushed me into chess. Other than that summer, as a kid, we were free spirits, right? We were playing in the forest. We were running around barefoot. Partly this was because a lot of people couldn't afford shoes, or your shoes had gotten so old and so small, but you couldn't get your name high up on the shoe list, which we would learn later there was no shoe list. The shoe list was a made up thing because kids were really only, prioritized when they really needed shoes, which in some ways was deemed like they had to, go to the doctor or something like that. Our parents really didn't check up on us enough given what was going on because they were doing a lot of processing, a lot of the game, and a lot of alcohol was involved in that. And because we were living on top of each other in cabins that were not meant to house the level, the amount of people that were in the houses, there were a lot of things just about our fundamental living space that were, dysfunctional to say the least. Sharing a 2-bedroom cabin with 3 different families and 10 kids sleeping in a room. And again, but as a kid, that sounds really inconvenient to us now, and in some ways sounds weird. But as a kid, there wasn't a lot wrong with that, at least as far as the day-to-day life was concerned. Food was delivered in a truck every week. For those wondering about that, we had again, financially merged community. There were a couple different garages that housed big buckets of beans and rice and sugar. And sometimes you'd be sent hey, I want you to go to Aunt Kendra. She oversaw the commodities. I want you to go to the commodities and get us some stuff, right? So we could go get a scoop of beans or sugar or rice or whatever and bring it back home. And then food was delivered in craft. We called it craft. Craft came and it was craft day. And everybody would get a crate of whatever their household needed, right? Depending on how many people they had, and food would get delivered. And that was fundamentally how we lived life. And a lot of bathwater that was shared. We saved money because kids would share bathwater. Yeah. And again, I've talked about it obviously with perspective now. And it's one of those weird things. We're back to opposing truths where I can say, I have a lot of fond memories of brothers and sisters who were not my brothers and sisters, and growing up in a group where I felt a sense of peace, at least for a certain amount of time. And then I can also say that with perspective now, it's not a childhood that I would wish for my own kids, right? It's interesting to hold both of those at the same time.
Absolutely. And how old were you when you started being around the presence of Dr. Duran, something that you were allowed to do from a young age? Or when did you start to be introduced to the teachings?
Yeah. So I don't know that I really remember my first trance, but it probably was when I was 6 or 7, maybe 8. I mean, I went to trances that were communal like every other kid, meaning typically the hierarchy of Duran's trances were you could have a private So a couple, if they were in real need, could have a private with Duran. You would say, I'd really like a private. And usually that was just Duran and one of the ministers, which was either Stephen Camp, Steve Rensch, my father, who was not my father, who I would later learn was my father, and then Marlo, his wife, who was the oldest daughter of Stephen and Trina. So usually it was Duran, because Trina wasn't there, and one of the ministers for a private. Then there could be small groups where, for a particular reason, a small group of people were brought together. Sometimes it was like a household, meaning the household was having issues, like some of the parents were fighting, they're not able to work through their stuff, so Duran might have a trance just for that house. And then there were communal trances, which happened on Sundays. Typically, these trances were sermon-driven. Duran would give a sermon that, again, may not be very different from what you might expect to hear in a church, just, different, more Eastern philosophy, religion about your karma and your lessons and sort of a different framework, but generally kind of benign and just meant to inspire. And then sometimes Duran would open the floor for questions and he would take questions. As the community went on, and I would say as her trance just frankly got worse, which you could say was from more alcohol. Maybe she just got worse at the skill, didn't really hone it. You could say she got worse at faking it if you're a non-believer. Regardless, I think that as trances got worse, which everyone was sort of feeling, those communal trances also got worse. There were less sermons. There was a more just immediately open for questions, and sort of what felt like Trina's ego or Trina's perspective about a thing was much more prevalent than Duran. And it's hard to say that to people. If you're sitting in the skeptic bucket, you'll have a hard time processing that. But if you have any idea or any openness that it could be real, and imagine that experience of being like, that didn't really sound like Duran. Like the voice was the same, but that actually just felt bad, right? And so people started to have these types of experiences, I think, in addition to other dynamics that were sort of, in hindsight, imploding the collective from within. And that was one of the things that I think ultimately just, tore it apart, was that, the reason people were there, it was no longer good.
So was that one of the first red flags, do you think?
I mean, for me or for others, let's see, especially as I traveled more and saw more of the real world through chess, I think I became smart enough or aware enough of other cultures and understandings, or just educated enough. I had read Animal Farm by Orwell. I think I had a perspective of, regardless of what's being said, what's being practiced here is not actually fair on a material level. And I think I saw that there were just hypocrisies financially. And then I saw that regardless of what everyone said, as some of this first generation, their parents started to die and they started to inherit money. And they also were sort of seeing, that sort of come out sideways a little bit, where, well, is all that money going to the collective? Like, how's that going to work, right? Because I don't want to do that anymore. And then people started being allowed to sort of keep a certain amount of money. And so you ended up just seeing this like disparity between the financial, what was said versus how it was practiced. And write about this in terms of my first visit to Stephen and Trina's house, or at least my first conscious visit. And I think in hindsight, that was a seed that I just always saw was just kind of not okay, or not really true. I think the other main red flag for me was the amount of relationships that were put together and then sort of split apart at the discretion of Stephen and Trina. I think you could say that when I was a kid and I didn't have my own romantic interest, and the woman who would eventually become my wife, maybe I observed it a little differently, or maybe even thought, oh, well, this is just how it's supposed to be, right? Because they should be in charge of it. They're the ones who understand most of Duran's teaching. And if you're not following the teaching, why should you be together? In my brain, like as a kid, it makes sense, right? And then you have this experience of there being direct threats to your relationship in regards to, if you're not practicing Duran's teaching, then you're not considered a spiritual couple, which means why would you even need to be together? Or you should leave the teaching. But would you really want to do that? Because, obviously the sin of doing that is pretty bad, right? And so seeing the threat to the relationships and then personally having my own stake, I think was probably the biggest red flag that, there really could be. And there were others later on. I mean, I write about probably the biggest one in my book was that when I was split between the war between Steve Rensch and Marlo Rensch and Stephen and Trina, which, by the way, was basically started because my dad inherited a bunch of money from his parents. And so he was now in his own group of like how him and Marlo wanted to live their life versus how Stephen and Trina wanted them to live their life. I actually share very little of how bloody and how horrible sort of everyone's behavior was in my book at this time. It was something that we just didn't have the editorial bandwidth to continue to go into.
Right.
But I would say me and my wife were caught right in the middle of that. And Steve and Marlo were essentially running their own cult within the cult, right? It was like two separate groups.
This would be the 90s.
Probably early 2000s, actually, because I already have my own kids now. I had Nash in 2005. So this is actually 2005 to 2007, actually. So me and my wife, and I know we'll go back in time, but I'm just giving a red flag that when I was first told, even just casually, that there was a chance that Warner, my second baby, wasn't my spiritual kid. Having known what I went through in my life, which we'll get into, that was like the biggest red flag of all, right? When I really experienced that could happen, that was kind of the biggest non-starter. I bounced around because I tried to make it personal, but if you want me to give it more about the collective, I'm happy to.
I forgot to ask you about the chess, which we go back in time. Your book covers so much ground, the history of chess, your history, the collective, your trajectory from, what did you call yourself, village rat?
That was the name of the first chapter. I was a happy village rat. It sounds bad, but I was a happy village rat. And we skipped past my mom and dad's divorce. I'm sure some people listening to this are like, wait, what happened to that, right? So if you want, I will do a very quick version of how did I become a village rat and how did I discover chess? I'll tell you both that this problem right here was what happened when we wrote the proposal for my story. And we ended up having a day where all the major publishers, Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, Hachette, who I ultimately went with, everybody lined up and I did all these interviews and we had a lot of great interest and a lot of great offers. The only criticism that came was people were saying, Danny, like, this is too much. They're like, is this a founding story of chess.com? Is this the story of one of the greatest like chess prodigy underdog schools? You guys became this like incredible, you basically became a chess cult where you guys took the world by storm. It's also a cult story, right? And wait a second, like what is going like? And then by the way, all of that happened before the cheating scandal, before everything that happened in 2022. So the criticism we got was like, this is a really difficult thing for us to understand how you're going to make into one book, and we're not going to sign you for a trilogy. I'm just sharing that was literally the criticism. Because the story is wild.
We have the same problem with the podcast, but that's also, we're going to go all over the place, and that's fine because it's long form and we can do whatever we want.
It's our podcast.
It's our podcast.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for bearing with us as we time travel with Danny Rensch between the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And what we have yet to establish is how Danny became... What's your title
These
now?
are flashback scenes.
An international chess master, chief chess officer of chess.com.
No big deal. How did that happen? Let's find out in part 2. And we're also going to find out, oh God, I don't even want to say this will make me cry, how Danny got pulled away from his mother and how he became everything he is today and how he healed and is calling us from his new life in Utah. Come back Thursday for part 2 with Danny Rensch. All right, everybody, that is the end of part 1. Please join us on Thursday for part 2 with our new friend, Danny Rensch.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
We hope you're enjoying A Little Bit Culty. If so, please do show us some love. Drop a rating or leave a review. Hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty.
Even better, send this episode to someone who needs it. Maybe they're in a cult. Maybe they're just a little bit susceptible. Or maybe they just love a good story. Spread the word, spread the love. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production.
Executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound. Our co-creator is Jess Temple Tardy.
Our production coordinator is Leslie Dinsmore.
Writing by Sandra Namoto and social media marketing by Eric Swarzinski and Brooke Keene.
Our theme song, Cultivated, is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslan.
You hear that? That's not just a Toyota truck. That's the sound of no crowds, no alerts, no distractions, and no telling what you'll find next. You know, like a detour. So why would you ever take a tour when you could take a detour. Toyota trucks.
Wherever you go, whatever they get into, from chill time to everyday adventures, protect your dog from parasites with Credelio Quattro. For full safety information, side effects, and warnings, visit CredeliaQuattroLabel.com. Consult your vet or call 1-888-545-5973. Ask your vet for Credelio Quattro and visit QuattroDog.com.